Hi, my name is Jacqueline Arellano, and I am the Executive Director for Exponential Espanol. Have you ever had a time where you felt something is too good to be true? Like, what's the catch? I have. Honestly, I have many times. It's especially true when someone sees something in me and I tend to not want to believe it because it's too good to be true. Well, when I was about 20 years old, I was wanting to shift from one line of work to another. Yes, at a very young age. I had started working really young. But I had envisioned changing the course of my life through this new line of work. But I didn't truly believe it for myself. But others did. Others believed that I could do it. And so one day I believed them and I went and I applied for the first corporate position in my family. I am the first professional of my family. And so I decide to take that leap and I decide to believe and I apply. And guess what? I got the job. But there's a but. After about 1 week, I get summoned to my boss's office, and his opening statement frightened me. He says, Jacqueline, you really don't know what you're doing, correct? See, I had fluffed up my application a tad bit. I had stated that I knew how to use a computer and that I knew how to use Windows and Word and Excel and all these other programs, which of course was false. I did not know how to use a computer and I did not know how to use Windows 95. Yes, I'm dating myself a bit there, but I didn't know how to use those programs, and I definitely didn't use a computer. And at this very moment, as I'm standing in front of my boss, I'm faced with either telling the truth and getting fired or not telling the truth and still getting fired. And so I proceeded to tell him the truth. I said, "You are correct. I do not know what I am doing, but I am a fast learner and I am a hard worker and I am young and I'm intelligent and I know I can learn this if you just give me a chance." And so he sat for a moment and he contemplated on the conversation and he looked up and he said, "Okay, I am going to teach you everything you need to know as long as you work hard, learn fast, because I know and I see a hunger in you and believe that you can do this." And that conversation is the conversation that changed my life. That's where the shift began. Why do you think that was? Do you think it was because I was going to have benefits or a higher pay? Maybe the stability of having a corporate position instead of a labor job? No. Those are all great things that did happen. But what changed my life that day with that conversation was that somebody believed in me and saw in me the capacity to learn. And not only that, I was worth investing in. And that changed my life because somebody believed in me and somebody thought I was worthy of being invested in. And it's amazing what that did for me. Now, my conversation today is going to be about strengthening your influence at every level. Now, you may think, this is a conversation all about how I'm going to grow my influence, my platform, my status. But I'm here to talk about how you strengthen your influence when you invest in others. It's not about your power and your platform and your status. It's all about what you do for others. That's how you strengthen your influence at every level. We tend to forget that God called everyone to multiply, to reproduce ourselves. But this is one practice that Christ's followers do the least. Now, I get to train many pastors and leaders across the country and internationally, and this one thing is what I notice. It doesn't matter the size of your church or how long you've been a Christian. Reproducing ourselves as a disciple or as a leader, it's not something people do. But from the moment that Jesus called his first disciples, he's inviting them into a journey where they will be apprenticed. In Matthew 4:19 and 20, it says that Jesus called out to them, "Come, follow me, and I will show you to fish for people." And they left their nets at once and followed him. Jesus knew that his time on earth was limited. He knew he didn't have much time to make everyone on earth his disciples. And honestly, I don't think he wanted to do everything himself. That's why he invites Peter and Andrew, and later John and James, and later you and me to follow him, to learn from him, to do what he did for us. So for 3 years, Jesus apprentices his 12 disciples. Along the way, he gave them opportunities to start doing some of the work themselves. Like when he sent them out, he said in Luke 9, 1, 2, and 6, when Jesus had called the 12 together, he gave them power and authority to drive out demons and to cure diseases, and he sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal the sick. So they set out and went from village to village, proclaiming the good news and healing people everywhere. While Jesus is apprenticing them, he's also sending them to start doing the work, and he continues teaching them. And when Jesus was finishing his time on earth, he then commissions all his followers and his disciples to continue the work and make disciples of all nations. On Matthew 28, 19 and 20, Jesus said, "Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you. And be sure of this, I'm with you. I'm with you always, even to the end of age." As we continue the mission that Jesus started, he said to teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you. Throughout his public ministry, Jesus was showing us how to reproduce ourselves just like he did with his own disciples. He invites his disciples to follow him and learn from him. He gave them some responsibilities. He sends them out to do what Jesus did with them. And those are the same steps we can take for us to reproduce ourselves. And how do we do this? As Christ followers, we do this through disciple making. As leaders, we do this through apprenticeship. Now, a little bit about my story. In the summer of 2008, while we were doing a leadership residency to plant a church in Chicagoland, I started as an apprentice for the kids ministry. I was invited to learn, participate in meetings, prepare curriculum, and also to teach alongside a kids ministry director for 1 year. That was a huge investment on me. And at our church, Our mission is helping people find their way back to God. And we accomplish this by reaching people far from God, restoring God's dream for the world, and reproducing this mission in others. Reaching, restoring, reproducing. It's in our DNA. Our pastor talks about this, teaches about this, has meetings about this. Goals are set around this. Campaigns are organized around these three main things. Everything we do at Community is around our mission. It's about reaching, it's about restoring, and it's about reproducing. So I went in and I started learning how to be a kids ministry director. And then later I start apprenticing somebody else to be a Kids City director. Then later I moved to First Impressions, and I'm the director of the First Impressions ministry in my church. And so what do? I start apprenticing an First Impressions director and many volunteers. And then I become the small groups director, and that was many people that we got to apprentice through that. I become a missionary for Haiti, and so I make a Haiti immersion program so I can multiply myself into other young people that are looking to do international missions. And presently, I have an apprentice for a conference director role at Exponential Espanol. I truly believe that every leader and every disciple can reproduce themselves. My personal maxim is his ministry must continue with or without me. And so I'm continually looking for opportunities to reproduce myself because the mission must continue. Now, there are 5 practices that we can all use to strengthen our influence at every level. Now, most of the information is from this book that was published in 2018 by my pastor, Dave Ferguson. And a lot of this is things that he had taught us prior for many years already. But this is a book that you can use to reference some of the content that I will be sharing with you today. The first practice is the practice of multiplication thinking. It requires a shift from thinking everything happens through my own leadership to thinking that ministry happens through multiplied leaders. Multiplication thinking requires constantly thinking how to multiply ourselves and challenges you to always have apprentices. Why? Because God's dream for this world is way too big for you to do alone. Even Jesus knew this. So, when you start dreaming big with God, multiplication is inevitable. Dreaming big changes questions from how can I do this to how can we do this? In 2020, we found ourselves in Mexico City, and we had moved in 2019 to start a multiplying church movement, of course. And so 2020 happens, the pandemic shuts down the world, shuts down Mexico City, and our dreams to plant a church that would multiply itself into this beautiful city, called Mexico City, had kind of come to a stop. And so we had, in our church, we practiced the napkin dream. And so we had our napkin dream that we were going to start a church in the south, in the north, in the west, and the east of the city of Mexico. And when the pandemic comes and shuts us down, we come back to our napkin and say, what happened, God? What happened to the dream that we had dreamt with you? It was a good, big dream. There's 23 million people here that need Jesus. Well, I think God had a different napkin dream. And he required us to dream outside the box. And so I think God's dream was for us to be all over Mexico. And so what started as a napkin dream for Mexico City turned into a napkin dream for the country of Mexico and even beyond. We started an online church for women that were looking for community in that time. And what started with a group of 7 turned into a group of 70 within 6 months. And they were all over Mexico and even in the U.S. And so dreaming big with God changes you. It's contagious. It changes others, actually. And so what was this grew into this. And so we'll come back to this story in a little bit. But the napkin dream is a good tool. I encourage it. Now, the next practice that we need to practice is permission giving. This is a shift from seeing what God can do through my own leadership to seeing what God can do through other leaders. Permission giving requires that we learn to lead with a yes and have what we call an I see in you conversation. Now, if you remember my first story, I had an I see in you conversation with my boss. He saw in me something, and that conversation changed my life. And this is a conversation that I've had with at least 14 people that I have apprenticed, that I know that I have apprenticed directly for an extended period of time. Of course, I have mentored and discipled others. But this conversation is the conversation that changed a story. And I want to share a story of Josie. Josie was my first apprentice. I can't believe she said yes to me, but she did. And what God has done through this story is that I got my first apprentice, and she was a rock star. I was a Kids City ministry director, and I was not a Kids City ministry director. I was not gifted in that. But I saw in her a passion and a fire for the kids of our community. And she was my first volunteer all the time and very faithful. And so I asked her, would you want to be my apprentice? Because I see in you a passion for children and a passion for Jesus. And I see in you what could be the best Kids City director in our campus. And so she decided to say yes to me, which I was surprised, but very thankful. Now, she said yes with full of fear and anxiety and very nervous. Now, I share this story because 13 years later, this was 14 years ago when I apprenticed her. She's now the Kids City director of our largest campus at Community. And she's also now apprenticed over 50 people in 14 years. And from those 50 people, there's been at least half of those apprenticed by those 50 people. So this is an amazing story that God uses to inspire me to never give up on seeing something in other people. If I would have held back and said, you know what, this is my ministry. I can do this, even though I wasn't great at it, but it's my leadership, it's my influence. I would have never been able to ask her to be a part of this apprenticeship with me. And I could have gone and done something. I would have never been able to go and do something else if I would have stuck myself into this position and not given her the opportunity to do what God had called her to do. And now she's flourishing, and I'm still flourishing. The next practice is disciple making. This is a shift from sharing what I've learned to add followers to sharing what I've learned in ways that multiply disciples. I have had the chance to do this with about 14 people, I said. And it's been one of my greatest pleasures to be able to walk this journey of apprenticeship and disciple making with about 14 people. Probably more, because I have also mentored others and pastored many. But these 14 people that I have had this conversation with, I have the 5 steps, this tool that I use that's called the 5 steps to apprenticeship. It's really easy, and maybe some of you have heard that, and it can be maybe redundant or repetitive, but it's worth saying. These 5 steps to apprenticeship are very practical, and they are included in our walks with our apprentice. The first one is that I will do and you will watch what I do so you can learn, and then we talk about this. And then the next step is I will do, you will help me do, and we talk about what you learned. The next step, the third step is you do, I will help you, and we talk. The fourth step is you do, I watch, we talk. And final step is you do, someone else watches, and you start apprenticing others. I've done this and it has worked for me. And I believe it can work for you. Josie, as I mentioned, she's apprenticed over 50 people. And those people have apprenticed at least 25 people. And the ones from Mexico, Olga. Olga has apprenticed over 25 people and now has book clubs, which is what we did in Mexico City, is these book clubs throughout her whole city and her state. The next practice is gift activating. It's a shift from asking God to bless the use of my own gifts to asking God to bless leaders whom I am sending out. Gift activating requires that we not fill slots, but instead develop people's gifts and commission them out for ministry. As I mentioned earlier, if I would have stayed in the kids' ministry and never apprenticed Josie, I would have never been using my gifts, and I would have never helped develop her gifts. And commissioning these people out have made more ministries. Now, the last practice that I'm going to talk about is the practice of kingdom building. This is a shift from counting the people who show up at my thing to counting the leaders who go out and do God's thing. Kingdom building requires that we reject all ways of measuring success and use simple tools like a scorecard that measures how many apprentices we have and had. Now, I have mentioned my 14 apprentices throughout my 15 years of apprenticing. And I have one apprentice now, which is my 15th apprentice. This is the scorecard that I want to keep. I want to know how many people I have directly apprenticed and discipled. And I want to know how many people these apprentices and disciples have made apprentices and disciples. And this is how I know that at least in my work, in the 15 years that I've been apprenticing, there has been over 100 people apprenticed. Over 100 people have been apprenticed and discipled and commissioned to go do the mission that God created them to be. So how can you say this is not going to work? It works. Friends, when you understand that your influence is not just for your own benefit, that it actually is for the benefit of others, you will be able to strengthen your leadership and grow your impact. Can you imagine how many people you can impact when you live out the way of Jesus? He wanted to show us that the practices he lived out would have a greater impact when his apprentices started doing what he did. Remember what Jesus said in John 4:12? Very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do great works. They will do even greater things than the ones I have done, because I am going to the Father. Now let's be followers of Jesus that do what he did and even greater things.